So I'm now off to the former camp at Danzig Matzkau. I'll give you a little bit here of information about where to find it. The road down here is the 91, as you can see. It's going to Gdańsk, and the 91 used to be the one. It was the main north-south road in Poland. So if you follow that all the way, you'll get to the border with Czechia near Cheshire, and it's 91 since the one became a motorway. Now you see the sign says there, it says Centrum, so if you can go to Gdańsk up there, so it's quite close to Gdańsk. It's walking distance, but for those who have a bicycle, you can use this wonderful bike track next to the Radunia penal, which is here. Now the bike track goes further down there, but what we've got here, this is the road to Stargard Gdańsk, and that's the route number 222, and so we'll go up there and find it. One thing I do need to point out is that you've got to ignore Google, because Google has got it the camp as being a couple of kilometers from where it actually is. So let's walk on the other side of the road, or cycle up the other side of the road, and it'll be on the same side as I'm on, so the right hand side of the road. And you can see the scenery. In 1939, this was it wasn't built up so much it is now. Of course, some of these buildings existed then. I mean, this building over here, for example, clearly is pre-war, as they appear to be as well. And this road was here as well. This is on the maps, the 222, and that's how I managed to identify where the camp is today, or remains of the camp is today. Short cycle ride up here, turn the camera around, and we take the road up there, past some auto businesses, and then we come into the camp. In September 1982, I went to the Auschwitz Museum for the first time. Whilst there, I bought 3 books, one of which was Auschwitz in the Eyes of the SS. In this book there was a mention, albeit brief, which grabbed my attention. It was a reference to a penal camp for SS members who had broken the rules of that organisation. At the time I couldn't find anything else about it, but now, 42 years later, I can remedy that situation. In this video, you will see part of the camp that was mentioned in that book. Although I would be the first to admit that I could have filmed this anywhere, today next to nothing remains. Furthermore, the city of Gdańsk is expanding, and what was once the countryside not so long ago is now providing housing. Developers are buying up land, and parts of the former camp are now out of bounds. I was fortunate enough to see some of the work going on what I think was improving the drainage. This work exposed a wall which I think was part of the entrance to the camp, of which I'm about to tell you. I will provide a link to photographs of some of the structures which were taken a few years ago. I will go back in the hope that some of the places were out of bounds will no longer be so, but in the future I'm expecting to find even less than I found during the visits that you will see in this video. In the hills to the southwest of the city, the Senate of the Free City of Danzig in May 1939 allotted funds to buy some land from a private owner. The declared aim was to build a recreational and tourist project here. Whether or not that was the real purpose, I have my doubts. Whilst under construction, access to the area was denied and it was closely guarded by the police, not the normal sort of thing you get on a tourist project. Whatever the original plans may have been, in July 1939, Heinrich Himmler made a visit to Danzig and suggested an increase in the number of men in its local SS units. Himmler was not interested in tourism, but he was interested in finding accommodation for units like the SS Heimwehr Danzig, and thus instead of tourist infrastructure, construction of barracks for the Danzig SS unit began here. As it happened, the SS Heimwehr Danzig was located in 4 places in the Free City, and this camp was to be one of those 4. SS Heimwehr Danzig took part in the attacks on the Polish post office in the centre of Danzig on the 1st September 1939, as well as the Westerplatte at the mouth of the dead Vistula River. On the 29th of September 1939, as the Polish campaign was coming to a close, it was moved to Dachau near Munich, where on the 17th of October 1939 it became part of the 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf under the command of SS Gruppenführer Theodor Eicke. An article which appeared in the Danziger Vorposten on the 18th of October 1939 suggests that the place of the SS Heimwehr Danzig at these barracks was initially occupied by one of the battalions of the 9th SS Totenkopfstandarte, the formation of which was completed on the 1st of November 1939 in Danzig, and later was probably joined by one of the subunits of the 36th SS Standarte, also from this city. In October of the same year, Polish prisoners from the Stutthof and Neufahrwasser concentration camps were delegated to build the Danzig Matzkau camp. To a large extent, these were people who had been arrested on the first day of the war when Poles living in the Free City had been picked up. I have videos on these locations and you can find the links below. In total, almost 1,500 Polish people worked here. The conditions there were very difficult, as they were at the Stutthof base camp. Prisoners slept on the ground, covered only with damp straw and maybe an empty sack if they were lucky. The difficult sanitary conditions caused lice to spread quickly in the camp, which in turn spread disease. The first transport of Poles included Alf Lichmanski, formerly in charge of the Danzig Scouting Organization for Poles. The Polish people who were working as slaves first expanded the camp, and later they were sent to other places such as the Westerplatte where battle damage needed to be repaired. After several months of work, living conditions in the camp gradually improved. The commando operated there until August 1941. The conditions intended for the SS Heimwehr Danzig, however, were different. The camp was designed to have 45 barracks, almost half of which were accommodation for the staff. The rest was occupied by the administration, a canteen with a kitchen, a field hospital, warehouses, workshops and an armoury. Considering the conditions of the time, the camp had an extensive sanitary facility and even a sports hall with a swimming pool and a shooting range. In addition, there was an extensive base for the motor fleet, including space for 100 vehicles and its own fuel station. Thanks to the proximity of the water tower and the appropriate installations, the camp also had an autonomous central heating system. The entire area was surrounded by a 2-meter high fence. Despite the city having had a strong presence of the Prussian army prior to World War I, it was one of the most modern and largest barrack complexes in the former Free City of Danzig. The prison camp was heavily guarded, and only one person is known to have escaped from it. In December 1939, a cleric from the Pelplin Seminary managed to get out. The camp operated as a barracks only for a very short time, that is to say, until the autumn of 1939. Then, for almost a year, as from October 39, it became a transit camp for German resettlers from the Baltic countries and from Volhynia, which was part of eastern Poland before the war. This was part of the policy of return to the Reich, whereby ethnic Germans were moved from their ancestral homelands in places recently occupied by the Soviet Union. Many of these people were then relocated to locations in newly occupied Poland, above all the Warthegau region. However, those that came from the Baltic states usually travelled by ship to Danzig, and it was in Danzig where they awaited for farms to be allotted to them. Farms which had been stolen from their previous Polish owners. Nearby locations which also served this purpose were sanatoria and social welfare centres in Chojnice and Kocperowo, as well as the monastery building in Chełmno, Topolno and Gołyszyce. By the end of the year, a programme of building 45 new settlement camps in territories occupied by the Reich had begun, 14 of which were in the region of Danzig-Westpreußen. Whilst these camps the displaced persons, which is what they were, as they probably had little choice in coming home to the Reich, waited for their new homes. They were forced to remain there until the appropriate decisions were issued by the National Socialist administration. After the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1944, the movement of people continued, but at a much slower pace. The camp, therefore, could be used for other purposes. It was to be used as a penal camp for SS men who had broken the rules of that organisation. So let's have a quick look at the legal situation as it existed then. It does, of course, need to be pointed out that I am not a lawyer and much less a lawyer specialised in Third Reich work. Now, according to the Military Procedure Code of the 17th of August 1938, the law applied equally to the Wehrmacht and to the Waffen-SS. A court-martial could give a death sentence, for example, in the case of murder of fellow soldier, desertion and insubordination, although in the latter case it would have to be very serious to warrant execution. The Waffen-SS initially had no courts of its own. In criminal cases, its members were subject to the general jurisdiction of the civil courts. On the 17th of October 1939, special rules were made for the SS and initially just applied to those active in the Danzig region. Jurisdiction now lay with the SS and police field courts. These corresponded to the courts of the other arms of the German military. The SS could punish its own men. In time, the Order Police, Ordnungspolizei, gradually moved under the jurisdiction of the SS and police courts, a process that was not completed until September 1942. The SS main judicial office was headquartered in Munich and was headed first by Paul Scharf, who was born in Danzig. He had a heart attack and died in July 1942 and was followed by his deputy, SS Obergruppenführer Breithaupt. Neither man had had any legal training whatsoever. The opinion of Scharf was, compared to ordinary members of the party, the SS man naturally occupies a special place, primarily because it is his duty to protect the movement and its Führer, if necessary at the sacrifice of his own life. This special position, of course, means that the SS man must be dealt with in a special way. In other words, the SS did not need to mix with the riffraff, and that included whilst being in detention, having been found guilty of crimes. Those convicted by SS and police field courts were initially sent to Dachau, but later they were sent to the penal camp in Danzig Matzkau. It was clearly not desirable for the Nazis to mix former SS men who could return to their units having served their sentences with concentration camp prisoners, whose only way out was likely through the chimney. On the 21st of July 1941, the Matzkau camp was taken over by the SS Main Judicial Office, the central judicial unit for all SS formations. The choice of the Matzkau camp had the advantage of being far from Munich and thus outside the gaze of the party bigwigs and the public in what was effectively the capital city of the Nazi organisation. It was also in the east, making it closer to where the released men might be deployed. Furthermore, the head of the SS main office had commented during his inspection visit in January 1940 that the facility looked more like a POW camp, thus making it suitable for its new purposes. In order to accommodate the prisoners, security had to be stepped up. Guard towers and a new electric fence were installed and the ground was levelled out. You can see in the film that it is still pretty hilly. New roads, both internal and external, were provided. The residential barracks also required renovation, of which more had to be built, both for future convicts and the guards, as well as accommodation for the camp commander, including a residential building. In the following months, new hospital rooms and additional sports fields were also built in the northern part of the camp. The first prisoners were brought to Danzig in January 1942, and by the end of the month there were 347 prisoners in the camp. They were employed primarily in construction work to adapt the former displaced persons camp to a prison camp, including workshops for vehicles. On the 1st of March 1942, more prisoners arrived from Dachau, and by the end of that month there were already 374 prisoners in the camp. Some prisoners, such as those already sentenced to death, remained in Dachau, but most were moved to Matzkau. However, death sentences were also carried out at Matzkau. One of those sentenced to death was an SS man from Stutthof, Albert Wagner. He was executed for desertion, rape and fraud. Prison work could reflect civilian trades both in workshops and on farmland. The local employment office in Danzig requested prisoners for many businesses and civil administration. This included clothing manufacturer, locksmiths and carpenters' workshops, municipal plants, vehicle mechanics, physical labour in the port and shipyard and nearby farms. Later convicts were used outside the camp, among others in the construction of the gas pipeline in Gdańsk or clearing the rubble from Danzig after bombing raids. As early as May 1942, it was noted that working outside the camp enabled prisoners to have contact with other prisoners, civilian workers and the local population, thanks to which smuggled alcohol and cigarettes were brought into the camp. It was pointed out that the relatively small guard staff was unable to prevent this practice. The range of acts on the basis of which an SS man could be tried and imprisoned in a camp was relatively wide. It included both common law crimes ranging from petty theft to murder and military crimes which could include desertion, going absent without leave, refusal to follow orders, being abusive towards superiors, self-mutilation, damage to military equipment and much more besides. In addition to these, there was also a catalogue of offences called in German Angriff auf Rasse, Volkskraft und Sittlichkeit, which included Rassenschade, or crimes against the race, that is to say, intimate contacts with non-Aryans, and wilde natürliche Unzucht, contrary to natural behaviour, as understood by the SS judiciary, that would mean homosexuality. SS men were also sent to Matzkau for neglecting their duties, and this could include allowing prisoners to escape. The increase in the number of people sentenced by SS courts from 1940 onwards was not due to an particular increase in crime during that period, but to the rapid expansion of the number of units subject to the judicial jurisdiction of the SS. Already in the second year of the war, in addition to the domestic SS and police formations, the formation of new Waffen-SS units and border police formations began, consisting of foreign volunteers, first of all from the citizens of the countries considered Germanic, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway and Denmark, and from the Baltic countries, the Soviet Union and others. In the spring of 1941, the first large non-German Waffen-SS formation was formed, the SS division Viking, Whilst in mid-1940 Waffen-SS troops numbered some 100,000 soldiers, in the following year there were already over 220,000, in 1942 330,000, and 1943 540,000, and by 1944 as many as 910,000. The rapid influx of volunteers to the Waffen-SS was quickly reflected in their growing share in the group of those sentenced by SS courts. The majority of them were young, often teenagers. The average age of prisoners was around 20. Some, of course, were officers. Many of them had not had proper training, and the reason they found themselves in Matzkau was due to errors resulting from their young age and carelessness, to quote the official reports. In Matzkau, they were to serve a sentence during which, through strict discipline and hard work, they were to make up for the deficiencies in their military training and be able to return to their units. In other words, they found themselves there because they hadn't been trained properly, made mistakes, then got sentenced for it, and then were being sent to Matzkau to learn what they should have learnt when they were given the basic training. The camp quickly gained a widespread bad reputation. The name Danzig Matzkau aroused fear in us. It was a penal camp for the Waffen-SS. We knew from the stories that it was hell. Lucky is the one who survived the camp in good health and was sent to the front from a penal unit. Well, there's a quote from people actually who were in there. The daily rhythm of the prisoners was strictly defined from the beginning. The time of duty was 12 to 14 hours a day, of which work outside the camp or exercises lasted at least 8 to 10 hours. Wake-up call took place at 5 in the morning. An hour and a half later, the prisoners assigned to tasks outside the camps were marched out. From 7 to 11 in the morning, exercises were carried out for those who remained in camp. After the lunch break, which was from 12 to 13:45, another round of compulsory exercises took place. In the evening, after 1800, the residential barracks were cleaned, roll calls were held, and internal camp service was performed. Lights out was at 2100 hours. In winter, instead of daily exercises, prisoners cleared snow or repaired damage caused by storms. On Saturdays, Sundays and holidays, work outside the camp or exercises were only partially limited. Once every 3 weeks, prisoners were allowed to write a letter. According to Heinrich Himmler's suggestion, the number of hours of military training was reduced to 2 per day in order to maximize the prisoners' labour force. Despite the doubts of the camp commandant regarding the possibility of conducting military training in such conditions, not only due to limited time, but also due to the impossibility of using weapons and conducting exercises in the open air, as well as a lack of personnel, military training continued. This was mainly due to the plans to use some of the prisoners to create new special units of the Waffen-SS and police. The idea of establishing SS penal units appeared in 1938, when 2 such units were established at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. In November 1941, the first formation composed of convicted SS men were created, who were given the chance to serve part of their sentence in labour or reserve units. These recruits mostly came from the Matzkau penal camp. Before official decisions were made to create and send to the front units composed of former SS members, the first improvised unit was formed near Gdańsk in the early spring of 1942, formed from SS men sentenced by a military court and unable to be sent to Matzkau due to logistical difficulties. In the following months, special probation units were formed. These were not penal units in the strict sense of the word, but units of mixed training and penal nature, where soldiers could, after meeting certain conditions, be released from serving the rest of their sentence and undergo rehabilitation. Service in such formations, however, only concerned those convicted who, as part of their punishment, were additionally excluded from the ranks of the SS. They were sent to probation units after a previous 6 to 8 week stay in a special reserve battalion near Prague in order to undergo additional military training which could not be performed at Danzig Matzkau. Former policemen, on the other hand, were sent to a special unit of the SS Police Division. Ex-SS men who were unfit for further military service still had the option of shortening their sentences by serving in workers' units, such as the one that was set up at the Dębica training ground in the Lublin region. A special category were those convicted who served their sentences without being kicked out of the SS. For them, the path to a possible shortening of their sentence led not through the training battalion, but through the regular reserve units of the Waffen-SS, where they underwent further military training and were sent to special units of the Waffen-SS. They could also be sent directly from the penal camp to anti-partisan operations, as well as to construction battalions or agricultural work. If an SS man was convicted by a field court-martial, he would usually be sent straight to a penal platoon. In the probation units, the probation period lasted from 3 to 6 months. The basis for rehabilitation were the reports of the company commander, which were collected at the SS main judicial office. The chances of survival in these special units, however, were small. The units were sent to the most difficult sections of the Eastern Front, or to engineering tasks which involved usually explosives. The best known units today are those which were made up of convicts from Danzig Matzkau, which went to SS units such as the Dielewanger or the SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 500. In 1942 alone, a total of 1,100 prisoners from Matzkau were placed in special units. Almost 2,000 prisoners from Matzkau were sent to the Dielewanger Brigade, famous for its cruelty. Now, I've done a series of videos on Dielewanger, whose troops were made up of criminals, initially recruited from Sachsenhausen, but then, to a large extent, from Matzkau. These troops were used as guards for Jewish slave labor camps in the Lublin district, then used to fight partisans in what is today Belarus. However, they are most famous for their acts of wanton destruction of life and property during the Warsaw Uprising, and in particular for the Wola massacre in the capital, when, in the week from the 5th of August 1944, they murdered around 60,000 Warsaw residents of both sexes, and they murdered the wounded insurgents that they found in the hospitals. As demand from the likes of Dielewanger for troops grew, the time spent at the Matzkov camp declined. The personnel of the Danzig Matzkau camp initially consisted of 7 SS officers and 29 non-commissioned officers, 113 SS privates and 5 civilian employees. The officers were the camp commandant, his 2 deputies, the camp doctor, the dentist, the commander of the guard company and the head of the construction unit, which was still operating the camp in May 1942. Of the SS guards, 21 served in the camp command, as did 23 non-commissioned officers, including the head of the camp administration, while the rest were divided between 6 platoons, each commanded by a non-commissioned officer. 4 civilian employees were employed in the operation and maintenance of the heating system. The 5th was responsible for fire safety. The camp staff was supposed to reach the number of 3 SS companies, but it seems that never happened. The growing demand for new Waffen-SS and police units caused the number of SS guards in the camp to drop to 60 in July 1942, which forced the camp authorities to request more staff. The camp was commanded by 3 commandants. Initially, SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Leo Ernst was in charge, then SS Hauptsturmführer Baumgartner, and finally SS Hauptsturmführer Dr. Berlitz. Until the autumn of 1944, the guards of the penal camp from Danzig Matzkau were from regular units of Waffen-SS, 68 permanently residing in Danzig or its immediate vicinity. The guard units consisted largely of young, poorly trained soldiers, and what is more, many of them were not German at all, but rather from the Baltic states, Belgium and the Netherlands. Prisoner abuse by the guards was so common that an inspection of the Matzkau camp was held in March 1944. The inspection was carried out by the head of the SS main judiciary office, SS Gruppenführer Franz Breithaupt, together with the higher SS and police leader in the Gdańsk West Prussia district, Fritz Katzmann. Himmler wanted Matzkau to be a resocialization and training center, As early as 1943, it was pointed out due to the specific type of prisoners held in the camp, as well as for the purpose for which the centre had been set up, methods found in concentration camps should not be used here. In 2003, an article was published in the Gdańsk issue of Gazeta Wyborcza written by Piotr Piotrkowski. One of those interviewed for this article was Werner Hertz, who was quoted as saying, "The staff of the concentration camp consisted mainly of SS men from Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. As new recruits, they certainly wanted to prove themselves as strict supervisors. In 1943, I visited my grandmother, who lived at Radaunerfer 45, currently Ulica Brzegi. I saw prisoners from the Matzkau camp working on repairing the canal. I went out specifically to the street to take a closer look at the scene. At one point, one of the guards started beating the workers. Several of them received blows with a wooden club. I couldn't understand it at the time. How is that possible? A German beating another German?" A subcamp was set up in Berlin-Ludwigsfelde in February 1943. Some 1,200 prisoners from Matzkau were sent here. Some of the guard personnel accompanied them. On the 23rd, 24th of August 1943, the RAF attacked Berlin, and this camp was destroyed in the bombing. Danzig Matzkau was the largest such camp, but other facilities were set up at Salaspils, Latvia, Mosbach in Baden, and Allach near Munich. By the end of September 1944, there were 2,200 convicts at the Matzkau camp, but more than half of them were earmarked to be sent back to supplement or form new units at the front. In the final period of its operation, the camp was also used, amongst other things, as an intermediate evacuation station for animals bred by the SS in the Eastern Territories. On one of the stages of the evacuations of prisoners from the Stutthof concentration camp, in February 1945, the camp was almost completely evacuated, partly to the camp in Hersbruck near Nuremberg and partly to Mosbach. As Danzig fell to the Red Army and the Vistula Delta was surrounded, those men that were still there had to defend the Zouave to the east of the city. On the 26th of March 1945, the camp was occupied by the advancing Soviet troops. As with many such camps, the Soviets put it to its intended use. Initially, it was used as a POW camp for German soldiers. Later, it would appear it was the NKV that used it for its own purposes of detaining those it found politically suspect. These people were mainly Poles who opposed to communism. Thus, it could have been that Poles who fought the Nazis found themselves having to share a bunk with their former enemies. When it was transferred from Soviet to Polish administration, it was turned into warehouses for the Internal Security Corps and militia units. For the population of Gdańsk, the conditions were very difficult in the immediate post-war period. However, there are those that remember the camp. In 1946, Bogdan Stropa was a teenager. He recalled in a 2010 interview with the website mojaorunia.pl what it looked like then. The camp was already partially destroyed. In the middle there was a boiler room, and around it there were still open-air pools. They were not covered at all. I still saw buildings in the former prison barracks. Everything was fenced off with a wall and a barbed wire. There was a cemetery next to the buildings. There were German inscriptions on the crosses. There were wrecks of cars lying around everywhere. People were already starting to dismantle these buildings. They were taking out doors and screwing pipes, taking brass valves. But I remember that some of the barracks were in better condition. Wooden floors inside, the windows were insulated, but no one was guarding it. People took whatever they wanted. There were trenches not far behind the camp, and towards the end of the war the Germans had to defend themselves here. There was a lot of burnt weapons everywhere, but also a lot of bodies in the ground. They dug up these graves. They looked for information about the fallen. Later they buried them again. Along Ulica Starogadzka, I saw the graves of Germans everywhere. The stench was incredible. This thankless task was performed by German prisoners of war. They were in terrible condition, dirty, exhausted. They were wrapping their legs in some rags. I remember one of them digging out a German, and this corpse was still wearing quite good riding boots. and the prisoner approached the Polish soldier guarding them and asked if he would take their boots. The Pole allowed him to do so. The German washed his shoes in the Radunia Canal and put them on his feet. Now it sounds shocking, but then, that's how it all looked at the time. It needs to be remembered that at the end of the war, there was a huge amount of homelessness as houses had been destroyed and people relocated to the area. Firewood was also scarce. Therefore, everything of value was needed. Life had to go on. In 1978, the area was taken over by the Matzkau Dairy Cooperative. This company went out of business in 2017. There is not much information on the camp at Danzig Matzkau, but I will mention the sources that I've used for this. Of course, bearing in mind that any mistakes in the text are mine. The best source of all is Jan Danianiuk's work, Obóz SS Policji w Maczkowach pod Gdańskiem, which was published in 2011. Jan Danianiuk has also contributed to a number of newspaper articles that have appeared on the camp, largely in the local press in the Gdańsk area. I've also referenced the investigation and trial of Albert Foster, who was the Gauleiter of Danzig. The Proust Foundation, to which you can find a link as they have photographs of remains which I could not access. The Pilecki Institute in Warsaw. Das Lager Danzig Matzkau, Strafverfolgung in der Waffen-SS by Franz W. Seidler, which was published in Geschichtsmagazin in April 1992, and the website mojeorunia.pl, which provided information on what happened to the camp after the war. I hope you found this interesting. I've done a number of videos relating to Nazi crimes in Poland and the beginning of World War II, and there are some links below. I upload videos every Tuesday and every Friday at 2000 hours my time. I'm based in Poland and Germany. I try to be present when videos are premiered, so that's your chance to interact with me and other viewers in real time. In order to know what will be uploaded, then I recommend subscribing. But for now, all the best from me in Gdańsk, Poland.